This is a McDonnell Douglas MD-88. It's a model of one, to be more specific. All you really need to know about it is that this is the first airplane that I remember flying on as a kid with my family. And when I flew on this airplane for the first time back in 2007, I think, I was terrified of airplanes. I mean really scared of them, like so scared that I couldn't sleep the night before a flight, and I would be physically shaking walking down the jet bridge to get onto the thing. Now this is an Airbus A220 model, and all you need to know about that is that it is the first airplane I flew on by myself. Hello, my name is Jack, and this is how I got over my fear of flying. Now listen, I recognize that this video is completely different from the sort of motivational stuff that I typically post. But even now in 2025, when flying is such a normal part of our society, I find that there are still a lot of people who are nervous flyers. People who are scared to get on a plane. And if you're one of those people, this video is for you. Let me just come right out of the gate and say this. No, I did not overcome my fear of flying by getting on an airplane by myself for the first time. No, I was comfortable with flying well before that. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got on the thing by myself. Because truth be told, when I was a kid and scared of flying, the only thing that got me onto an airplane was my parents. Because I felt safe with them. But why? Why was I so scared of flying? I mean, statistically, it's the safest thing a person can do. It's safer than me sitting in this house. Yes, this was the first aircraft that I remember flying on, but I know that it was not the first plane I ever flew on, because I remember having taken a trip to Disneyland with family before this flight took place. And I don't live in Southern California, in fact, nowhere near it, so it's not like we just drove. I promise you we took a plane, I just don't remember. Now, the reason why I remember this flight so distinctly over the ones that I took before it is because on this flight, I experienced some of, if not the worst turbulence I've ever experienced. And look, I've been on a lot of flights in my life. I'm very fortunate to say that my family and I take at least a couple of trips every year. And for most of those trips, I wasn't afraid of the planes themselves, I was afraid of turbulence because of this flight. So here's how it went down. Again, I think this was 2007. My family and I were traveling from our home here in Oregon to visit some family in Ohio. But at the time, there were no direct flights between Oregon and Ohio, so we had a connection in Salt Lake City. This was during the summer months when Salt Lake City is prone to getting a thunderstorm here or there. I think you can see where this is going now. Basically, on the day that we flew in, there was some bad weather in the area, and our flight was the last one cleared to land before there was a temporary ground stop. For those of you not familiar with aviation and its terminology, ground stop just means that all the planes on the ground stop while they wait for the weather to blow over. And during our final approach, the few minutes before we touched down on the runway, I would say that it felt like a roller coaster, but a roller coaster doesn't really do it justice. It was more like being in an elevator that was being yanked up and down on its cables extremely quickly. It was that terrible stomach rising, stomach dropping sensation. I mean, there were people on board who were screaming, and it was not good. Somehow, and I wish I knew who the pilots were, but somehow they pulled off a safe landing in that. I don't know how, but God bless them. Because they were definitely some skilled aviators that day. But skilled or no, this flight had, and I know this might sound corny, but it had scarred me. Because for years and years and years after it, I was terrified of even the lightest of turbulence. It freaked me out. So for many years, getting on an airplane was very hard to do. And if it weren't for my parents always being there on those trips, I probably would have missed out on a lot of life experiences. So, how did I get from here, being absolutely terrified of flying, to here, getting on this plane by myself? Which, just for the record, happened in the summer of 2022. So what is that, like about a 15-year difference? Well, over time, I became an aviation enthusiast. For reasons that I will never be able to explain to anybody, despite my fear of flying, I was simultaneously encapsulated by airliners and how they functioned. In fact, I still am. For all of you curious cats out there, I have an entire Instagram page dedicated to photos of airplanes that I take. I am not joking. Now, I'm not saying that you have to become interested in airplanes to not be afraid to fly anymore. What I am saying is that when you understand how they work, and you understand exactly just how safe they are, your faith and your trust in the machine and the pilots that are flying it becomes impenetrable. And when it comes to turbulence in particular, modern airliners are built to withstand even the most extreme turbulence, the kind of conditions that chances are you'll never even experience in your life flying. When you're on an airplane and it encounters turbulence and you look out the window and you see the wing flexing, especially if you're a nervous flyer, that's one of the freakiest things, right? Because you think, oh my gosh, the wing is gonna fall off. But actually, no, it won't. The wing is designed to flex. It's designed to bend like that. I don't know what the limits are for the A220 in particular, but I do know that there are some airliners out there where the wing can bend a full 90 degrees before it breaks. And then there's understanding what turbulence itself is, because again, when you're on an airplane and you experience turbulence, especially more rough turbulence, it feels like the airplane is dropping out of the sky when you get that stomach rising feeling. But actually it isn't. You see, lift, which is the force that keeps airplanes in the air, is not something that just comes to a dead stop while it's in flight. So when you're on an airplane during some rough turbulence, it kind of feels like this. You're going along, and then you just drop down suddenly like that, and then you carry on. But actually what's happening is the airplane flies along and it does a dip like that. But most importantly, it doesn't fall out of the sky. Even if it feels like it's going to, it never will. And what's happening here is a disruption in airflow. That's it. A bit like a pothole in the road, a disruption in the road, for example. It's just a disruption in airflow. But it will never bring an aircraft down, no matter how extreme of a disruption it is. The way that I like to think of it, which is from somebody else that I heard on YouTube, is that think of it like the airplane is encased in a cube of jello. And when the jello, or in this case air, is calm, the aircraft feels stable. But if you tap the block of jelly, or jello, the whole thing wobbles around. And tapping the block of jello is the equivalent of an airflow disruption. The aircraft is not going to just suddenly fall out of the block of jello because it's moving around. And airplanes are so automated and so technologically advanced that the autopilot systems on them are able to keep the aircraft automatically trimmed to ensure that no matter how rough the turbulence gets, the aircraft is always going to remain stable, even if it doesn't feel like it's stable. And the thing about turbulence is that it's basically unavoidable. Pretty much happens on any flight. Usually it's not that rough. Usually it's pretty light turbulence. But you can't escape it. Happens every time you fly somewhere. So when I realized that turbulence was not only normal, but perfectly safe, as the airplanes have been designed to deal with it in a safe manner, and the pilots are trained to always navigate around rough air as best as they possibly can, my fear of flying slowly started to go away. It didn't happen instantly. It still took many flights of sitting next to my parents and admittedly holding on to their arms whenever we encountered some rough air. But eventually, I did become relaxed with the sensation, understanding that encountering turbulence on an airplane is just as normal as encountering bumps on a road in your car. So, when my high school graduation rolled around in 2022 and I found out that we had the opportunity to travel to Disneyland as a class to celebrate, I was able to take that flight. And I was able to go by myself, with friends admittedly, but I had always traveled with my parents before because I was afraid. I never traveled just me. That flight took place in June of 2022, and it was on board one of these, an Airbus A220-300. And it was a great flight, and I had a great time in Disneyland. So if nothing else, I promise you, no amount of fear of flying is ever going to be worth missing out on opportunities like that. It's never going to be worth missing out on travel like that, on experiences like that. Sure, I get that it feels uncomfortable, I get that it feels nerve-wracking when you encounter a bit of rough air, but it is perfectly normal. And frankly, it's a small price to pay for traveling the world, if I'm honest. So yeah, I don't work in the aviation industry, and I sure as hell don't know everything about the aviation industry. But I certainly hope that if you're a nervous flyer, and if you're afraid of turbulence like I was, that this video helped you out at least a little bit. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll talk to you real soon. Take care, man. Peace out.